I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm probably not going to talk to you about strategic leadership as much as I'm going to talk to you about tactical and maybe some operational leadership. And it's not even on the battlefield, it's going to be in garrison. Because we've got a real issue with our Army today. I want to discuss it with you for about 30 minutes, and then I hope we can open it up to questions. I'm going to go as quickly as I can through my prepared remarks because I think it's absolutely essential that we have some time to answer your questions. This is kind of a different topic than I think anybody's ever presented at the War College, but I think it's a critically important topic. So if you could go to the next slide. Over the past year or so, the Army has conducted a much-needed and honest look at itself. I think many of you have seen the report we put out on health promotion, risk reduction, and suicide prevention. I find it one of the most important documents I've seen in my 38 years in the United States Army. I really believe that. And I have to applaud the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary of the Army for allowing us to publish that document. Because for those of you who've read Chapter 3, it's pretty hard-hitting. Last year when I came to talk to you at Carlisle, or last year's class at Carlisle, I talked at length about the changing nature of warfare. This year I want to focus on the second and third order effects, and they are significant of that changing nature. What I'd like to do is focus on three things. What the Army is finding, what the Army is doing, and where we need your help. And this is a plea to you. And you are uniquely qualified to provide that help because you've experienced something different, I would imagine. Most of you have experienced something different than those who entered the Army after September 11th, 2001. I think most of you in that audience were in the pre-war, pre-Iraq, Afghanistan Army and know how we used to do things a little bit different, particularly in garrison. Next slide, please. No, stay on that one. Over the past 9 years, the Army has learned valuable lessons. Unfortunately, we took the skills required to lead in garrison for granted. This has been further challenged, and our problem here, by the signature wounds of this war, which are traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. And I'll talk more about these later in my remarks. During our review, we recognize that many of our existing policies and practices don't adequately address some of the situations we find ourselves in today. We're making the necessary adjustments to include TRADOC as reinstituting garrison skill sets into our non-commissioned officer and officer education programs. What will make these efforts truly successful is experienced leadership by people like you. Leaders who know what garrison leadership looks like, and to help coach and mentor our junior leaders who frankly don't have experience in the garrison environment in an Army that is not under the stress that our Army is under today. We're moving toward a 1-to-2 bog-dwell ratio. We're going to be spending more time in garrison, and one of the reasons that Chief was convinced to go ahead and publish the report was his belief that it was really time, as we started to improve bog-dwell, to go back and take a hard look at ourselves. In writing the report, the thing that struck me is that I've always considered the Sergeant First Class the bedrock of the non-commissioned officer corps. The platoon sergeant has a special place, at least in my Army. And it's interesting that many of our E7s in the United States Army today entered our Army after September 11th, 2001. We've got majors in the Army today who entered the Army after September 11th, 2001. And when we talk to them about some of the things that we used to do, some of the programs that we had available to help soldiers that are having a rough time, they have no idea what we're talking about because they've never experienced that. Next slide, please. The slide you should be on is what the Army is finding. And unfortunately, a significant portion of today's generation of leaders and soldiers only knows a wartime Army, defined by increased responsibility and autonomy down to the lowest levels, and high risk, high adrenaline combat environments. There's a phenomenon I call the CHU mentality. Downrange, when a soldier is off duty, his CHU is considered his sanctuary, the place that he or she goes. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Some of our young leaders see leadership in garrison as intrusive. What we recognize as accountability and caring for soldiers, they see as a violation of a soldier's privacy or interruptions to their hard-earned personal time. The problem is, in theater, the threat is on duty. Back at home, the threat is off duty. When you couple this attitude with the second-order effects of the R4Gen model, you get an organization that thinks the mission is over when you redeploy and hit home station. The area we are neglecting is the soldier's reintegration with the organization, his family, and the community. The mentality that we have in our Army today is redeploy and release. And I really think that's an important thing to think about. I mean, we have broken the habitual tie between the brigade commander and the division commander. Now, when you're at your level, that may seem like a real good thing. I'm struggling with that right now. I got to tell you, I'm struggling with that right now, and wondering what we've done. You all know the deal. You all know that the brigade commander and his team and soldiers return from a deployment sometime between 90 and 120 days after that deployment and their return home. You have a mass change of command. A brand new team comes in. The old team was focused on what the soldiers had done. The new team is focused on the next rotation, the next trip downrange, and preparing soldiers to go into the fight. And I think this can create some real issues. Go to the slide, the next one, the CHU mentality, please. Unfortunately, this all has led to a lack of leader involvement and accountability. Some leaders aren't referring soldiers to the Army Substance Abuse Program, and many who do aren't following up to ensure that soldiers are receiving treatment and counseling. Many leaders aren't initiating and following through on administrative separations. There's some real issues here, and when I talk about the Army of pre-2001, I don't want anybody to think I'm asking us to go back and automatically take that template and put it on the Army we've got today. There's no doubt in my mind adjustments will have to be made. But when I can find a soldier in the United States Army that's come hot on a urinalysis 15 times, and they're still in the Army, or someone who has gone to ASAP, an outpatient program, and been in 2 or 3 times and fails again, I think that's something we need to pay attention on. And the final point I'd make here is commanders are not routinely following through on the famous form, the 4833. The commander's report on disciplinary action taken or not taken. And this creates some real problems. I recently checked a major installation where they had a 21% return rate on 4833s. And if you're not returning a 4833, and the old rule was when I was a brigade commander, I'd get a call from the deputy corps commander if I didn't make the 30-day suspense. And it wasn't an attempt to try to get me to hammer people. It was an attempt for me to kind of square the circle, so to speak, and like we all did, report the disciplinary action I had taken or decided not to take in the case of a particular infraction. As a result, we're seeing an increased number of soldiers with repeated criminal offenses. We're seeing too many illicit drug users who are multiple or serial offenders. We're also seeing an increase in incidents of violent crimes, including suicide, homicide and suicide, and sexual assaults. And we're getting to the point on sexual assaults where we can no longer claim it's because we're reporting better. They continue to go up every single year. And I've got to believe there's a connection here. Next slide, please. What we do so well in a combat environment, we do very poorly in garrison. Yet in many ways, it's even more critical when we're back home, especially when you consider that the soldiers are tired, they're stressed, and returning from, in many instances, multiple trips to high-stress, high-adrenaline combat environments. And you are poster childs for all that. How many folks do I have in this class who've already commanded a brigade and are now at the War College? Could you raise your hand? For the U.S. soldiers who raised their hand, when I went to school, that number would have been 0. It was an unwritten rule that you would attend the War College before commanding a brigade. But I know what your environment is, and I know how many of you combat arms and other folks feel. You feel that if you're not downrange, if you spend any more than 18 to 24 months at home, you're taking yourselves out of competition for the next higher rank. You're some of the worst offenders. When I take a look at CGSC attendance, I ran in on the USR report that we do the other day. The very first battalion commander that I have ever heard of who had not attended CGSC, and when I asked the question, how many lieutenant colonels did we have who have not gone through CGSC, or ILE as it's called today, we came up with 276 in the United States Army. I remember taking folks and literally putting them TDY and locking them in a hotel room to finish the course. The box course where they sent you the books and you got your CGSC degree so that they could be considered for lieutenant colonel. But that's not the Army we've got today. The NCO who runs his soldier and pushes him to keep going, to increase the number of reps that he does in the gym, he should also be the guy grabbing him by the collar and saying, hey, you're drinking too much and you need to get some help. And then follow up and make sure he gets that help. And that's not happened. Instead, I'm afraid that the mentality is nobody's shooting at me, I'm fine, or nobody's shooting at him, he's fine. And that's the wrong mentality to have. The reality is the threat is much greater back home. Over the year, more soldiers have died in garrison than in combat, whether as a result of vehicle collisions, training accidents, alcohol, or drug overdoses and suicide. Next slide, please. Now, this whole phenomena is further complicated by the signature wounds of this war, namely traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, and quite frankly, other behavioral health issues. People need to understand that post-traumatic stress and TBI are not phantom conditions exhibited by weak soldiers. And in the question and answer period, if you want me to explain either one of them to you, I will. It'll be a tanker's explanation, not a doctor's, but I can give you what is a physiological condition. This is not something that's a phantom condition. These are both injuries that require treatment. And any of you who have kids who play football who aren't following with great interest some of the work that's being done on traumatic brain injury, I highly recommend that you do. It is absolutely critical that we eliminate the long-standing stigma associated with seeking and receiving help. There's no reason for people to be suffering in silence with any of these issues. Leaders at all levels must ensure that individuals are aware of and willing to take advantage of available treatment and counseling options. Let's face it, there are going to be those that attempt to take an advantage of this to avoid legal action or separation. I need you to fight through that frustration. And I know it is a frustration because it's more important that those that need the help get the help than it is trying to find those who are gaming the system, so to speak. Next slide, please. Now, the reality is this is a significant population. Now, I think most of you know about the Army Wounded Warrior Program. That was a program started by my predecessor long before we had the problem at Walter Reed. It is a program where we are literally tracking soldiers who are injured on the battlefield who we know are going to have a single disqualifying injury of 30% or greater. In some instances, an AW2 coordinator links up with them at their intermediate stop at Landstuhl on their way back to the United States, introduces him or her and talks about what the AW2 program does. In a couple of words, what we do is we promise these soldiers that we're going to provide them the help that they need, not just while they're in the Army, not just while they're getting better from their injuries, but throughout their entire life. We're going to stay with them. When I took over as the vice chief in August of 2008, the number of soldiers in our Wounded Warrior program, our AW2 program, with that service disqualifying injury of 30% or greater, suffering from post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, was 38%. In just 2 years, that number has grown to 63%, 46% have PTS, and 17% have TBI. And you can see that the closest to those two is amputations at 11%. So we have a large portion of the force that are suffering from this. Go ahead and click on the build. Overall, in the past 7 years, in excess of 60,000 soldiers have been diagnosed with some measure of traumatic brain injury, whether mild, moderate, severe, or penetrating. And I would add to that, if you go into our 29 WTUs that we've got all over the country, we have about 9,500 soldiers in those WTUs, and over 50% of them in every single one of the WTUs has some kind of behavioral health issue. And the real issue we've got is the comorbidity, the sharing of symptoms between traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. Next slide, please. You should have a slide up that says, what are we doing? Now, the Army is taking a holistic approach to dealing with these very serious injuries and the other challenges we're facing. We're learning as much as we possibly can. We've instituted new protocols downrange to assess and treat soldiers who experience a concussive event. We're supporting promising research efforts underway, and I'll talk about these a little bit more in a few minutes. In fact, when I finish with you today, I'm going to take a 2.5-hour VTC. I was going to leave you today and go to Fort Detrick to get briefed. I'm going to take it by VTC about some of the treatments and the research that we're doing. The Army's Health Promotion and Risk Reduction Task Force and Council will help us to implement many of the recommendations from our report, OSD's report, and the Fort Hood report, and anywhere else we can find recommendations that make sense. The goal is to ensure the right policies are in place. Our programs are properly resourced at the local level, and that our leaders know what to do and fully leverage the resources and support available to them so that they can best help soldiers and their families. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we've instituted protocols downrange to address and treat soldiers who experience a concussive event. The positive feedback that we're receiving from commanders on the ground has confirmed that these protocols, directing rest and rehabilitation, as well as on-hand assistance from multidisciplinary care teams, is increasing the percentage of soldiers that recover from their concussion in theater and eventually return to duty. Since instituting the protocols, over 500 soldiers have returned to the fight after suffering a concussive injury. And the important thing is they've returned to the fight recovered from that concussion. I hope you all know that the real issue here is if you get a second or third concussion before you fully recovered from the first. these protocols and the teams co-located with units in theater are not only helping to treat and rehabilitate injured soldiers, but they're also helping to increase awareness and adherence to new policies across the force. And when soldiers see that these injuries are being taken seriously, protocols are enforced, and the stigma is no longer tolerated, they'll become part of the solution, and that's absolutely critical. They'll start recognizing symptoms in themselves and their buddies. They'll admit they need help. They'll pursue treatment, and they'll take the time to rest and recover, even when it means staying behind and missing the next patrol. And I don't know how many of you know about these protocols. I'm briefing every brigade going out now on the protocols, but it basically says that if you're in a vehicle that is damaged by an explosion, if you're within 50 meters of an explosion, or you're in a building where an explosion takes place, or if you're command directed, you'll be evaluated for concussion. And we hold soldiers out for 24 hours after that evaluation, even if that first evaluation shows no concussive event. We hold them out for 24 hours and evaluate them a second time. That's because many times the symptoms of concussion don't produce themselves to the individual until up to 24 hours after the event. And I got to tell you, when we put these in downrange, I was concerned. I was concerned like guys like John Campbell, who was really the first one to implement them with the 101st, would come back and tell me this was unacceptable, that we were impacting on his combat power downrange. As I briefed it, I told him I really thought that this was going to be something that would, in fact, add to his ability to keep soldiers into the fight. And as you can see by this totally unsolicited email on here that he sent me about 2 weeks ago, he is very, very pleased with the protocols and the impact they're having on the unit. And I'm pleased because I really think we're stopping a large number of soldiers from getting traumatic brain injury. Not all concussions result in traumatic brain injury. Just got to tell you that. Next slide, please. This should be promising research underway. There are also some great examples of some promising research underway. The Army's 5-year, $50 million partnership with the National Institute of Mental Health. We're doing the first ever end-to-end look at suicide and the causes of suicide. This promises to be as big as for those of you who are into this stuff. Before too long, some of you will be told to take an aspirin. I know you all get your cholesterol taken. You all know what your blood pressure is, or you did it one time. And you've all gone to the doctor who's asked you about family history of heart problems. That comes out of a report called the Framingham Study. The Framingham Study has been going on since 1948, and it's lowered the incidence of sudden cardiac death in this country by over 68%. A tremendously successful study. That's what we're trying to do with the National Institute of Mental Health. We're hoping what we get out of this study is an algorithm that would be not unlike what you would be asked if the doctor was trying to see if you had, you were at high risk for having some kind of heart problem. We hope to have the same thing, that we can tell people if they're at high risk of developing behavioral health issues. Not that they're going to commit suicide or anything like that, but we're hoping to find out if we can, come up with an algorithm that'll be predictive in nature. I'm also really pleased with some research being done out of Boston. The VA hospital in Bedford, Massachusetts, is conducting promising research on tau proteins. Tau protein is a good protein, except it can become a bad protein, mutate, collect in the brain. And I think, some of the stories you hear about NFL football players who retire, go into business, do great for about 8 years, then all of a sudden start to develop dementia, all of a sudden start to have anger management problems, and in some instances commit suicide. There's a lot of belief that this is because of mutated tau protein that collects in their brain. They've been studying this in football players, and that we've had this kind of phenomena take place in that the spouses of NFL football players have been working with Dr. McKee up in Massachusetts and donating their husbands' brains for research. And in many of these, they've found this mutated tau protein. We see the same thing in boxers. And it also has a connection, we think, to Alzheimer's. So, but there's a lot of really interesting research. The U.S. Army Medical Research and Material Command, or MRMC, who I'm going to talk to later today, is paving the way in the study of biomarkers that may soon help diagnose traumatic brain injury. We believe that within 3 years we'll be able to do a simple finger prick, a blood test for brain cell damage like they do with a diabetes patient. Carrying a little pencil thing about this long around, a medic could just prick your finger and make a diagnosis within 20 minutes whether or not you had traumatic brain injury. Medics would administer the test within the first 4 to 6 hours after the blast. Researchers tell me it is about 95% accurate for identifying the protein biomarkers of traumatic brain injury. And this is truly amazing stuff. And not only does it have battlefield application, but if you look across sports injuries for youngsters, this would be a tremendous boon to young kids. Because we know, the brain doesn't fully mature till 26 years of age, 26 to 28 years of age. And youngsters are more prone to be injured by concussion than us older folks. And, it's not football that's the number one sport, youth sport, where we have the most TBI injuries. It is girls soccer, believe it or not. And I'll leave you to figure that out, but they think it's from head-to-head contact and headers that they do. However, it really is important to recognize that these efforts are in their infancy stages, and we're pushing them as hard as we can. Right now, the responsibility lies primarily with leaders and commanders, and now you will have the most effect on helping us with this. Recognizing that soldiers who undergo a blast or a similar event need time to recover. Next slide, please. Now, this is the only chart I'll show you for right now, unless a question leads to one, but this is a chart we put together to try to put the suicide issue in context. As you can see, the big blue ball on the left side is the total Army population. That represents a population of about 700,000 soldiers. I know we count all Reserve and National Guard soldiers on active duty in our active duty ranks. And when we publish suicide statistics and other statistics, that's why we break it down between the active and the reserve components. In our numbers, the active is normally 700,000 folks, with those that we have mobilized, and the reserve components are down around 400,000. But that is that 700,000 group there, and what we tried to do was to show here, the 160 suicides that we had last calendar year or fiscal year were really a small little teeny dot, a very, very small part of this huge blue dot here. Albeit tragic, that's 160 deaths. When you look at it in comparison, because we're always talking about this, it is really a very, very small part of the force. In order to see that dot, we had to PowerPoint shade it. But in between there, you see some of the other problems, and not problems in many instances. Outpatient behavioral health care is the next biggest ball you see there. To me, that is a good thing, because that means that people are going in and seeking help. It also shows that we're starting to screen people when they come back using VBH, but virtual behavioral health screening, rather than just filling out a PDHRA or PDHA. Then you can see some folks not only get counseling, but they have to have a prescription drug. I'm not talking about aspirin here. I'm talking about some kind of psychotropic drug that is someone gets a prescription for 3 weeks or more. And these could still be help-seeking individuals, but in some instances, prescription drugs lead to abuse of prescription drug. And, I know that for some of you think the only person that would abuse a prescription drug is a weak person. Since we've come out with a report, I've had 2 general officers sit down in my office, one 3-star and one 2-star, and tell me if it had not been for their significant other, they would be hooked on prescription drugs that they were given like this for operations that they had to control pain. These are the same kind of drugs. 1 Percocet turned into 2 Percocet, turned into 3 Percocet, turned into 3 Percocet and something stronger. And then we've got criminal offenses up here, drug and alcohol offenses, inpatient behavioral health care. Sometimes we have to put people into that. Suicide attempts, high-risk deaths, and suicide. Now hit the build if you would there, please. What should have happened is a shaded box should have come up over that chart, and that shaded box is really important. But this is where we need your help. We need you as leaders to focus your efforts in the shaded area overlapping the health promotion and risk reduction. Ask yourselves, are we properly focusing on soldiers having problems with drug and alcohol offenses, criminal offenses, and prescription drugs? Are commanders and first sergeants aware of the programs and resources available? Are the right policies and programs in place and properly resourced so the commanders and first sergeants can identify these soldiers and get them the help that they need? Our goal is to keep as many soldiers as possible from progressing down the path to the right and get those who are exhibiting high-risk behavior back to the left. That's where I'm focusing my message now, trying to get folks to focus in on these high-risk soldiers. To me, that is the key from stopping them progressing to the right. Next slide, please. Now, most importantly, we need your help in eliminating the stigma associated with seeking and receiving help. Remind people that it's okay to take a knee. And if you could go ahead and click, I'd like to show you a PSA that we had put together by some really important folks. If you could run that.
Hi there, and thank you for your service to our country.
We're so proud of you.
You're the best we've ever had.
As a veteran, you are part of America's nobility.
I know firsthand the challenges of war.
One of the ugly realities is that sometimes the enemy comes home with you.
Your experiences in combat are so powerful that very few will or can understand what you went through.
I put the war on every morning, and I take it off every night.
In those days, we didn't have the same services and resources and tools
that are available today to help service members and their families
deal with the challenges of deployment and reintegration.
If you return from combat and have concerns about your mental health,
the tools and the resources are here now.
Do yourself and your family a favor and use them.
Ask for help.
Remember your warrior ethos. Refuse to accept defeat. Never quit. Don't let the enemy defeat you at home.
Now, for me, that was some powerful stuff. When we were trying to figure out how we could reach out to soldiers to start talking to them about this, we were going to try to enlist NFL players to help us out. But Buddy Buka saw me at an event one day, and I don't know how many of you know Buddy Buka, Medal of Honor winner. He gave us the idea for this and pulled these folks together. Buddy Buka suffers from post-traumatic stress, and he'll tell you the entire story. I won't talk to you about it right now. But this PSA means a lot to me. Because these are the guys that our soldiers look up to. They look up to NFL players, but when you've got Medal of Honor recipients who are willing to stand up and ask them to get the help they need, I think that's powerful stuff. I hope my remarks today give you a little bit better idea of the challenges we're facing in our Army, what we're doing at the DA level to address them, and how important it is that you as leaders reinstitute the lost art of leadership in garrison.